You're listening in on an animated discussion about Batman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from the Cinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Season 2, Episode 8, Time Out of Joint. Tick tock. The clock puns are coming, Josh. All over again.
I'm fine with it because I think the best part of this episode is that Clock King never stops for 1 second being the Clock King.
Yep, there they are. There they are.
There's all kinds of stuff going on around him that we may or may not enjoy. We'll talk about it.
It's
but
time
he is himself.
To quote the Clock King. It's time for you and me being the Clock King, to renew our acquaintance.
I know.
It's time.
I know.
Time is on our side.
He's right on time.
Passing
just in the nick of time.
He's going to pass a timely sentence on the entire judicial system.
Oh my gosh.
So anyway,
I listen, I'm 100% here for it. I really am. The whole point of Batman villains is have a gimmick, commit to the gimmick.
I agree.
So I love it.
But no, here's the thing, Joshua. Clock King does drop a lot of these puns, but Batman drops just as many.
I know.
And hey, listen, I'm not
as surely as night follows day. Shut up,
man.
Just stop.
Just stop. Hey, I just want to throw out there. I love the clock puns. I just want to get them all out of the way up front so we can actually talk about what's going on now.
I also do kind of question Batman jumping on that bandwagon, like Batman 66. I want Adam West making all the clock puns too.
Sure,
right? Like I'm here for that.
Sure,
it's a little out of place for the BTAS Batman to be joining in the time punnery. So let me mention an interesting thing. The new Batman Adventures intro is mysteriously back after its absence for several episodes.
Okay, Joshua, I'm actually glad you mentioned this because I'm watching these on Blu-ray.
Yes.
I watch these in like sets of like 4 or 5 episodes at a time, and it is not consistent in any way. In any way, like it's sporadic. I don't know if the episodes that have the Batman and Robin. Is it because Robin's in it more? But then there are episodes that Robin's hardly in that have it in front of it. Yeah. I'm like, there's no consistency.
He's actually in this one.
He is,
which is good. But yeah, it's just I just noticed it's like okay, out of nowhere, and then leads us into one of the laziest title cards we've seen in a while. I mean, we've seen some bad ones that are just bad, but this one is just really lazy.
I thought it was all right.
It's fun.
I mean, it's not. Yeah, lazy is a good word.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I'll just throw this out there. Hot take. You might not. You're going to disagree. Last week we talked about Harley Quinn.
Yes.
How it's a great image. It's a powerful image, but it also, again, with the context of, we've seen it a lot. I feel like they put as much effort into that one as they did with this one.
Ooh, interesting.
Because this one's also kind of lazy, but they both feel like they're copy and pasted from somewhere.
Okay. Interesting choices. Okay. I don't know that I do disagree with you. We talked about how much the intervening 25 years are reading back into my enjoyment of Harley Quinn episodes.
Sure.
Maybe they got me on the title card too. Fair enough.
So just an observation, because it's not a great. This is not a great title card, but it's not. I don't think it's inconsistent with what we've been seeing lately, generally speaking.
Yeah, I really do love the fact that this show does a title card every episode, but it does seem like as time went on, one of the things that fell by the wayside was like a lot of critical, serious thought about the title cards. They became a thing that they had to do a lot as opposed to a thing that they were excited to do.
Well, I mean, obviously, we see when they do the full the whole rebranding with the new adventures or whatever, there is no title cards.
There's
anymore.
no title cards, yeah. And I mean, this is actually on point for talking about this episode, but I mean, and boy, will we get there. But after the redesign, it's essentially a different show.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, yeah.
There is some continuity. It's not like from nowhere, but it could have been, we're going to keep the parts that we like and jettison a whole bunch of other stuff to basically make another show. And we're seeing the seeds for that
here.
Before Time Out of Joint, but I think you really saw it in Time Out of Joint. Tell me about that.
Well, yeah. So one thing that I noticed when we're talking about when they go through the redesign, which we're going to talk about when we actually get to the redesign, but one of the things
it's hard to not bring up though, because it's really like a BCAD kind of switch for the show. So it's difficult not to talk about.
I feel like in a lot of ways it turns into a more it's still risky, but it turns into something a little more conventional as far as like a cartoon for children. And that's not to say,
I agree with that.
And by the way, there are still some hella dark episodes in that batch that are just as dark or well written or kind of like who's this for as the original series.
It's true.
But there's more emphasis on the action. There's more emphasis on the kind of heightened reality stuff, which we see here in Time at a Joint. We see that Clock King has discovered a scientist who can create like a device that can really manipulate time in some way, displaces time in one way or another. And this is something I don't feel like we could have gotten in Batman the Animated Series Season 1, or at least in the first batch of episodes. No. But we've had Ra's al Ghul, we've had some of the Poison Ivy stuff, even some of the Mr. Freeze stuff. We've built this kind of...
We took where they were, we turned them up a couple of notches.
Slowly but surely.
And Batman also gets turned up those notches just by the virtue of being in those stories.
Right.
Yeah. And I really liked your observation of this in this episode, because Clock King still is so much 100% the same character, but now we've given him a time gimmick as opposed to keeping time, if that makes sense.
Well,
it's a big shift that makes a certain amount of sense, but is also a massive shift in storytelling.
Right. Well, as opposed to being someone who just tracks time, he's a person who actually can manipulate time and warp all over the place. And that's what I'm saying. These sci-fi elements are coming into play a lot more frequently in this later season.
Things got more mystical and just more global with Ra's. Things we take the seeds of horror, that we have with Ivy and really just turn them up even more notches. The show is doing in the second season all the things that it was doing in the first season, but more so. And your observation that I really appreciated was how much that sets the stage for
the redesign,
DCAD shift when we go into the redesign.
It's a smoother transition than you'd expect. And again, like it is still a big transition, but I am seeing that some of these episodes, especially Time at a Joint, which honestly, as far as like themes and big ideas, is a little thin in that area, but it is really amped up, and the action, the sci-fi, the genre stuff. I love some of this stuff. I loved the Batmobile getting stuck. That was amazing.
I really liked that trap. I loved that trap, to be honest, and equally hated how they got out of it.
It was really dumb.
Yeah.
E still equals MC squares.
That trap deserved better, damn it.
It did. That trap deserved smarter Batman to get out of it.
I agree.
It's like they had a great idea for the trap, but they're like, how do we get out of this?
How do we get out of this?
Let's just start citing science stuff at the audience. They'll roll with it.
And okay, I don't want to get too into this because I am also not a physicist myself. Okay. But if you're going to bring that up as part of the danger there, I think we need to reckon with how that undermines the rest of Clock King's plan, right? He should not have been able to steal that clock. It should have been obliterated when his nearly infinite mass hand ran into it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, they undermined some of their own stuff with the trap and didn't need to.
Well, I just want to know that they apparently had Batman stuck in time for 2 days. There was 2 days of Gotham with no Batman.
There were 2 days when the Batmobile was parked there.
Yeah. Just
like a
there.
statue.
Yeah.
We never deal with this fact.
No, not at all. And I was like, well, why didn't Clock King just commit his crime?
Your plan in the 2 days that they're not around.
48 hours is a long time, man. Huge vulnerability in Gotham City. And did the Joker not just walk by and be like, hey, that's the Batmobile? Were there not news crews all over there with a helicopter?
Right. How was it not like Batmobile watch day 2? It raises questions it's not interested in asking, and I don't approve of that choice.
I mean, here's the thing. I don't approve of it, but I do. It's kind of like one of those, like, you just have to suspend your disbelief.
All the stuff going on around it, I really, really like. Even the trap itself, I'm like, that makes sense. But maybe slow them down instead of speed them up, because you get the same danger to them without the difficulty of why didn't he just run his scheme during
for 2
days?
Yeah.
Even if he wasn't expecting it to take 2 days, after a minute, after about 8 or 10 hours, he's like, move the timetable.
Well, at the very minimum, please don't put the Batmobile riding somewhere in the middle of Gotham City where you're right. It's just going to be sitting there for 2 days.
For 2 days. Here's a random thing that I thought you would appreciate. Did you notice that the device itself looks like a Super Nintendo controller?
It definitely looks like a Super Nintendo controller.
We've noted before how much Nintendo stuff this series has borrowed sort of uncritically, and I just found that amazing.
They've even used sound effects that were present in Nintendo games. So I wonder if they had like some sort of agreement worked out with them or something, or if they were just totally just rolling with it, using the iconography.
I'd be really curious. I mean, it affected, for instance, the Riddler episode with the virtual reality. It affected it so much that they chose the Virtual Boy as their model.
Yes.
So maybe, but it's also so circumspect in a lot of ways. I don't know. We still have a Super Nintendo in my house. So I just looked at that and was like, there is no way that they weren't looking at a Super Nintendo controller.
I'm sure Bruce Timm and Paul Denny and all those guys were big gamers. I'm sure someone over there was a big gamer.
Various and sundry style of nerds were involved in this show.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, Joshua, I think that's just the biggest takeaway from this episode. It's because I actually think it's a fun episode. It's pretty light though. The Clock King.
I like the Clock King a lot.
I do too. He's the gimmick is fun. He commits. I thought it was hilarious when he accidentally knocked that old lady over and she went and beat him with a purse.
So it is funny, but it's a little weird that he's in a hurry.
Right.
Because he's the Clock King.
Yes.
And also because the world was frozen around him.
Correct.
It's just, these are the kinds of choices where we break established things for a gag or for a set piece. And I don't love it. Here's the thing I do really appreciate. We have a scientist asking if we should, not just if we can. And you can count on one hand with fingers left over the number of those guys that exist.
Ian Malcolm is shaking his head somewhere, clapping, applauding.
Thank God somebody actually thought, should we do this? And the answer is no.
I think the entire Silicon Valley just needs to read Jurassic Park over and over until they get the idea.
They need to watch this episode over and over, eyes peeled back, Clockwork Orange style, until they hear that scientists... I'm just going to put this away. You guys aren't ready.
Exactly. Wow. Look at that responsibility. Look at that. I think that's a clever thing. And I will say one thing I thought was a little disappointing. In the first Clock King episode, the entire drive of Temple Fugate is that he is wanting vengeance on Mayor Hill. And he still wants it here, but he wants a lot more. And it feels like his vengeance is pretty secondary. And they don't really go into any detail about like when he changed his mind about his priorities. I don't know. It just didn't seem like it was as urgent.
The tossing in of the judicial system is not bad. Like, it's consistent.
Yes.
But it does feel like a thing that we should get a little more interiority on instead of just stealing really expensive clocks at high speed.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
exactly. Well, and I mean, if you want to take down the whole judicial system, you feel like he would have talked about that the first time. Where in the first one, he was very focused specifically on Mayor Hill.
It is a judgment that took his company away, and so it's not like wildly inconsistent, but it does feel like a thing we should have nodded out on the way. And there's just a little too much going on in this episode.
I think that's probably the thing too. Yeah, it was again, it was more focused on the cool visuals and action set pieces and stuff, and there was a lot less emphasis on his motivations. I mean, I guess they just assumed because they covered it so well in the first episode.
It's fine.
And again, like you said, not inconsistent, but it just feels like the motivation here isn't as strong or clear.
Yes. I mean, I think that's what they do. It's not a bad choice, but it muddies things enough that this otherwise very laser-focused character gets diffuse, right? And I think that's the gimmick with moving at high speeds too. Like, it's more or less thematically appropriate, but it just kind of like is just off-brand enough, you know? So I think, Caleb, you liked this episode more than I did. So tell me, do you consider it an essential watch?
No, it's not essential. It's fine.
It's fine.
It's not essential. I think if you really like the Clock King and you like the first episode, watch it. But honestly, I really think the first Clock King episode is essential. And we'll see him again in Justice League Unlimited, and he has a really great appearance there.
Yeah.
I don't think this chapter that we have here in between is really necessary.
Yeah. It's interesting the way I agree with you, but I would twist one thing you said just a little to the left. It's interesting that you say, if you really liked the Clock King in his first episode, show up for this one. I would actually say that the other way. If you if you loved the Clock King in the first one, probably skip this one.
Is it because
if you just liked them? Okay. Because it's just off-brand enough, right? Like, it's not bad. This is not bad. None of these choices are bad.
But he's never using time manipulation technology in future episodes either.
Right. It doesn't become a thing with him. And when we see him again, it's very much back to that, I just know schedules, right? So if you really, really appreciated that sort of meticulous nature of what the Clock King did in his first episode, this is probably a big skipper for you. But if you just liked him, okay, show back up. And that way you get to come with us on our ongoing thematic discussion of how the knob gets turned up on the weirdness in BTAS.
We've been seeing it a lot lately, but I think we're going to continue to see that. And I do think this episode is a really great example of showing, like, wait, we have time manipulating technology, not a time machine, but time displacement devices. And we're only going to see it get bigger and bigger, which fine. Makes sense because we know at the end of the day, we're making it to Justice League Unlimited.
Eventually we get to, I don't think they knew that at this point, but eventually they get to Justice League. And certainly whenever, longtime listeners have heard me say, I prefer Batman as superhero more than anything, right? And this is the kind of stuff that gets him to that place. I think any qualms or weirdness that I have about it are entirely because we're in this liminal space between BTAS and the redesign, where we're kind of trying to do things from both of them.
Yes.
And it's not bad. It's just weird. It's discomforting to me. Even though it's going to get me where I want to be, I'm in this in-between space where I'm like, I don't know.
Well, I think looking back at the history of the show as a whole, this is a very interesting period of the show. Because it's one of those, I think the writers and the creative forces here, they really wanted to do more with the character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They hadn't committed to a redesign yet. They maybe didn't know if they were going to get Superman yet.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot going on there where they felt like we've exhausted the well of kind of traditional detective stories.
Yeah, let's turn it up a little
bit and see what the audience is willing to accept, and they're doing that here. And we know at the end of the day that yes, they do get Superman, so they've already laid the groundwork for Batman to have these sort of encounters.
Yeah, to step up into that more superheroic space and less, sort of vigilante detective space.
Right.
It's a choice that I am largely good with, and I think that it's interesting that it's this episode that brought that out for us, right? Like, I didn't have those feelings about the Demon's Quest because largely I mean, problematic issues aside, I approve of the Demon's Quest. It had to be in an episode where I was sort of on it for me to realize that I was like, oh, I'm in an in-between space. And it's the growing pains aren't always consistent. Sometimes they're painful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Joshua. So we're saying non-essential. Not bad, just not essential. So on that note, Joshua, as always, we close out our show with some alternate media recommendations. So what recommendations do you have for our listeners today?
So I really felt for the scientist in this episode how much he had been played by the Clock King. Like, he'd come to trust Temple Fugit, and then Temple Fugit just destroyed that trust by turning this invention of his against the world. I felt for that guy, even though he's very much a bit player in this episode. And it made me think about how where we put the camera tells us how we should feel about the target of these cons, right? And so I've mentioned Ocean's 11 before, where we are shown that they are very much the good guys who are doing something worthwhile, even if it's for selfish reasons in the wrong way. But I wanted to, since we spend so little time with the scientist, I wanted to go back to 1988, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Oh, I love Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. That's great.
The big picture is you have two con men who are in competition with each other trying to steal a rich old lady's money one way or the other. Like, one of them's kind of going Lothario, the other one's kind of going weirder. I will say no more because it is a fantastic film. But we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how this affects the mark in the con. We very much are on the shoulders of the con men. And the fact that I love this movie, and I've seen it many times, and it was an episode of BTAS that made me realize we don't really spend a lot of time with her, is when I was like, okay, this is an interesting, it's not good or bad, it's just an interesting way to look at how framing these stories changes our emotional reaction to certain characters.
Because in certain circumstances, the con men are the good guys.
Yeah, and in this one, they're not the good guys, but we don't feel bad about it, really, because we don't spend a lot of time with the mark.
Right.
So anyway, it's also really, really funny.
Yes, it is.
As you're watching it, having these other deeper thoughts, I think you'll enjoy Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Check it out. I'm, of course, going the time travel route. A movie about a person who's kind of unstuck in time. You look at 12 Monkeys.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, that's starring Bruce Willis. Great Terry Gilliam film. Very underrated time travel film.
I like that pick for this episode because he really is unstuck in time as opposed to actively, purposefully time travel.
Right, exactly.
Like, that's not what's happening in this episode.
Yes.
So that's an excellent pick. Very good pick.
Yeah, I think so, because in this episode, we're not necessarily dealing with time travel as much as it's time displacement.
Yeah.
And I think we see that with 12 Monkeys for certain. I'm pretty sure I've already said this, but I'll just throw it out there again as a nice reminder. For one of the best versions of a time displaced character I've ever seen, look at season 4, episode 5 of Lost, The Constant. I'm confident I've already said that, but it's just a great episode, time displacement. Check it out. But it's also a great love story. So check that out.
Well, that about wraps up this animated discussion. Caleb, where can people go to continue the conversation with you?
Well, Joshua, you can always find me on Twitter talking about film, television, video games, and all sorts of other pop culture goodness at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. I'm also the editor-in-chief and film critic at the Cinematropolis, and we publish these in-depth essays on all types of different films, oftentimes including science fiction and superhero films, all the stuff you'd want to read about. And you can find all of these articles at thecinematropolis.com. Joshua, what about you?
I'm also most active on Twitter, where you can find me easily enough at Joshua Unruh. And remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions.
Join us in our next animated discussion, Season 2, Episode 10, Bane.
Until next time, we'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.